Support comes from the Missouri Forest Products Association, providing more than 41,000 jobs in the production of wood pallets, railroad ties, white oak barrels, hardwood floors, and more. Details at choosewood.com.
Welcome to St. Louis on the Air. I'm Sarah Fenske. In Missouri, unlike a lot of states, you can't just vote by mail because it makes your life easier. State law contains only 6 reasons for casting an absentee ballot. Among them, you're traveling out of the county, or you're, quote, incapacitated due to illness or disability. Governor Mike Parson has said he doesn't think all this sheltering at home counts as incapacitation. Under his interpretation, elections within the state in June, August, and November would all go forward with in-person voting. The ACLU of Missouri wants to stop that. Working with the Missouri Voter Coalition, it's filed a class action lawsuit. And joining us today to talk about that suit is the organization's legal director. That's Tony Rothert. Tony, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
So what exactly does Missouri law say about voting when you have an illness or a disability?
So, as you mentioned, Missouri is unlike most states in that you have to have an excuse to vote absentee. You can't just do it for your own convenience. Mm-hmm. But one of those excuses is that if you are incapacitated or confining yourself because of illness, that you can vote absentee. And when you vote, when it's because of illness that you're voting absentee, you don't have to have your ballot notarized.
So you say confining yourself because of illness.
Yeah.
It seems like a lot of us are confining ourselves these days, and it's related to illness being out there. So is that enough that we can just all go ahead and request absentee ballots and vote from home?
Well, it should be. Some local election authorities have interpreted the law that way. St. Louis County, for instance, is if you're confining yourself and it's because of illness, then you should request an absentee ballot and not come on election day and vote in person. Mm-hmm. But other election authorities like Jackson County have said, no, that is not a good excuse. The governor has given his opinion that it's not a good enough excuse, and the Secretary of State just won't say, leaving it up to local election authorities to decide.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned the Secretary of State here. He is the state's chief election officer, and he is deferring to the county boards of elections on this. Were you surprised by that decision?
Well, a little bit. It seems like when they needed emergency rules for the voter ID law to go into effect, Secretary of State Ashcroft was really on top of that and used his rulemaking authority on an emergency basis to get some rules in place. So I'm surprised that he finds himself impotent to do anything about this situation. But it presents a real problem because there are more than 100 local election authorities in Missouri, so you have a risk of 100 different interpretations. And that really changes, especially when we get to the August and November elections. It changes the rules for voters so that people voting in the same election have a different right to vote depending on where they live in the state. And that makes it even worse.
So what would be the risk if, say, I'm living in a county where they haven't issued clear guidance on this? I decide to just go for it. You know, some counties are interpreting it this way. I'm just going to cast my absentee ballot. What happens if I make the wrong call on that in the eyes of the local authorities?
Yeah. Well, one risk is that your vote wouldn't count. You'd be forfeiting your right to vote. Another is that you could be prosecuted for a felony. Absentee voter fraud, not getting absentee ballot under pretenses that aren't allowed by the law is a felony.
Okay.
And, there are more than 100 prosecutors, so it would be in their discretion whether or not to prosecute such cases. And just to make it worse, because it's a voting crime, if you were convicted of that felony, you would lose the right to vote for the rest of your life. So,
oh my, okay, so there's some real consequences here.
Yeah, not small stakes.
Okay, so you obviously want to head off these kind of consequences. You do not want to see me have my right to vote stripped for the rest of my life or to see me charged with a felony over this. So talk to me about what that means. What are you doing legally to try to get this opened up so everybody can cast these absentee ballots?
We brought this case, nice and early, sort of early here in April, so that there's plenty of time to have this issue resolved before the August election, for sure, before people are requesting absentee ballots. And what we're looking for is for there to be one rule across the state, one interpretation of this illness exception and how it applies in the circumstances that we're all experiencing these days. So that's our main claim in this case, is asking the court to tell us, in light of this uncertainty, what does that exception mean, and how does it apply to the fact that most of us are confining ourselves at home to avoid contracting or spreading the virus that causes COVID-19.
Now, you're suing a number of entities here, including St. Louis City and Jackson County, as well as Secretary of State Ashcroft. Why these particular parties?
The simple answer is that those defendants are named the local ones because they're the election authorities for where our plaintiffs are from. But the reason we're suing the state and the Secretary of State is to try to get one court ruling that affects everyone in the state, so that every local election authority, every prosecutor will be bound by the determination that the court eventually makes.
Do you think a state court judge will be likely to issue that sort of ruling that would be that widespread?
Yes, in state court, the state court judges, in this case, is brought in Cole County, which is where the capital is. They're used to being asked to interpret laws and say what they mean, and that's what we're asking for here. And if we expect that this would likely be appealed either way, and the Missouri Supreme Court could make a final determination so that all voters will be treated equally across the state.
And as you say, you're trying to do this a little bit early. I know there's a big deal election in November everybody's thinking of, but there are elections coming up quite a bit sooner than that. Do you think we can get this sorted out on that statewide level before we get to, I believe, June?
We're going to be asking the court to expedite this as quickly as possible. I don't know what's going to happen about the June election. The August 4th statewide primary, you start applying for absentee ballots July 22nd. So it's really important to us to have a decision by then. When everyone's in the same jurisdiction voting in a local election, at least it's the same rule for everyone. It really gets dicey when you're in a statewide election like August and November, where you have different voters operating under different rules, kind of on the whim of their local election authority.
Yeah, I mean, if this doesn't get sorted out, it seems like there could be a wide spread between voter turnout in a county that allows this sort of thing versus something where they're asking people to have to go out and do this in person when so many people are very scared right now.
Yeah, for sure. If in a county that's encouraging absentee ballots and absentee voting by mail, there could be a very high turnout, and in a county where you have to choose between showing up on election day and risking that you're going to spread or contract, a potentially deadly virus, or foregoing your right to vote. I mean, a lot of people are just going to choose not to vote, and that will give very unequal representation in the polling places on election day.
Now, the flip side of this, though, there's an argument being made against absentee ballots that there could be an increased risk of fraud, and perhaps that's especially a possibility in this case because, as you say, if you're doing it for reasons of being incapacitated or confined, you don't need a notary for that. Are you worried that people might take advantage of this to do some dirty tricks in these very important elections we have coming up?
There was some absentee ballot fraud covered in 2018 in North Carolina. So this is a real thing that happens.
It also happened here in St. Louis. The Post-Dispatch did stories just a couple years ago about that. The Hubbard family and some shenanigans with absentees here.
Yes. So, there is a risk, as there always is. All but a dozen states allow no excuse absentee voting. So having it for an excuse is we're already in a minority of states. And even those states that require a reason, other states like Alabama and Delaware and Virginia and Massachusetts have all interpreted their laws to apply to allow people to have an absentee ballot in this situation. So we must be vigilant against fraud. But that's true. That's always true. And there's no reason to believe there would be more fraud just because absentee ballots are available in Missouri the way they are in most of the country.
We put this to some of our listeners in our Facebook group, the St. Louis on the Air Facebook group, and Sarah said in response, the military has been using vote by mail for decades, suggesting that it works for them. Why not us? Brandon also notes, absolutely, it works in other states. One shouldn't have to risk their life in order to vote. Now, Tom emailed us a question, and I'm going to turn this one over to you, Tony, since you're the lawyer. He writes, do provisions of U.S. constitutional law regarding the right to vote provide a basis for a right to vote by mail during a pandemic? Any thoughts on that question?
Well, I don't know if the U.S. Constitution does, but one of our claims in this case, not our main claim, but we do have a claim that the Missouri Constitution provides the basis for a right to vote by mail. The Missouri Constitution is even more protective of the right to vote than the federal Constitution. So here in Missouri, I think we do have the right to vote by mail, especially in a time like this.
So we don't even need to consider the U.S. Constitution at this point. You're saying the Missouri Constitution is plenty strong on that question.
Right. The Missouri Constitution is even stronger. But we don't think we even need that because we think the statute, as it's written, I don't think this is what they had in mind when they were talking about confining yourself because of illness, but it seems to fit just fine.
We also got an email from Richard Von Glan. He's the policy director with Missouri Jobs with Justice. And here's what he wrote. I think Missouri voters are disadvantaged that we are one of only 16 states that do not allow no excuse absentee voting. Voters shouldn't have to explain why they are choosing to vote a certain way. And no excuse absentee voting is a tested and proven method from these 34 other states. The confusion surrounding whether or not you can vote absentee due to illness is unnecessary if we would instead just adopt this common sense solution as a permanent solution. Any thoughts on whether it might make sense to look for a change to the law going forward here?
It most certainly does. The Missouri Voter Protection Coalition, who is working on this case with us, has been advocating for years to make voting more accessible in Missouri. More and more states have gone to allowing no excuse absentee voting or vote by mail. And no state goes back. Once voters get a taste of being able to vote by mail, they become all mail-in elections like we have in Washington and Oregon and Colorado, because it just makes sense. It's easier for voters, it's easier for election authorities, and it really encourages people to participate in democracy.
Well, it'll be interesting to see if there's any sort of movement, if that movement continues to grow to make that happen here. But for now, we're going to keep an eye on this lawsuit, and we may have to have you back to talk about this as it continues to sort out. So, Tony Rothert, thank you so much for joining us today.
Okay, thank you for having me.
And Tony, again, is the legal director for the ACLU of Missouri. And just one note, tomorrow, Secretary of State Jay Ashcroft will be joining us. He'll be on at the top of the hour, and he's going to explain his reasoning on this. So you might want to tune in then, especially if you have questions for him. This is St. Louis on the Air on St. Louis Public Radio. That's 90.7 KWMU.
Support comes from the Missouri Forest Products Association, providing more than 41,000 jobs in the production of wood pallets, railroad ties, white oak barrels, hardwood floors, and more. Details at choosewood.com.